It's extremely hard to moderate a conversation with luminaries whose operating careers is actually longer than the amount of time I've been in existence on Earth. But I think the useful curiosity is something that will hopefully end up taking us through. So I would like to keep this more as a dialogue and a conversation amongst. My job is to primarily to instigate and to ask questions and to actually hear from you, hear from both of you. There are some questions I would like to direct to one of the people here, but it's actually open for anyone else to end up chiming in on that. These are general questions that you would have obviously encountered during the course of your life. Some of them are specific to you and certain circumstances without any names, but we'd love to get, I think, insights from the broad history as well as broad experience that you have. So starting off with MDP, the first question is, there's an inherent tension in the relationship between an investor and an operator, especially on the board. There's obviously a divergence of views, divergence of outcomes. Some investors are more transient, who are there for a certain amount of time to realize certain value and then to end up leaving. So they have a shorter term mode of engagement, whereas the operators want to stay on the board for longer, make sure there's a more sustainable company. I think startups are the grandest showcase of this, where the inherent tension between growth and sustainability has more or less bottomed out at this point in time. Similarly, the power dynamics on this board also end up changing, depending on the health of the company, depending on how crucial an investor's participation is, etc. I think the question that a number of entrepreneurs have, and we've actually seen this across the ecosystem, is how should one manage this tension such that value can actually be created, not destroyed? Because from an investor perspective, there's a portfolio of companies, so one may not be as important, but as from an operator's perspective, that one company is all they actually have, for that matter. The second one is, how does one generate value from board members, when some of these board members are adamant at the fact that they owe no fiduciary duty to anyone in the company except themselves, and their own interests are actually paramount? So much so that they actually legislate that into the governing documents of the company as well.
Siddarth, if you talk among yourselves and work out what is sustainable value, a sustainable value is which can be there for a longer period of time and where everybody benefits. And discuss among yourself, you set a base on which you can build on. And the second thing is the market vicissitudes which offer you an opportunity. Sustainable value has to be created over a long period of time, and that involves growth, that involves profitability, building people, etc. And that is something on which you can have a consensus. But we are in the market economy, and there are going to be vicissitudes and opportunities that are available to raise capital, to get an exit, blah, blah, blah. And you take advantage of that at the right moment of time so that, both sides can be solved. But what it requires is a, dialogue within both sides and understanding about both opportunities. The market is booming, $42 billion comes in. Obviously, money is available. And if you don't raise money, then you're foolish. Because money must be raised when money is available, right? At that point of time, people who think they want to go out is fine. Some people must say, I'm here for a longer time, and we can reconcile that. The second thing, second question you asked about is how to deal with board members who think that the fiduciary responsibility only to themselves, right? Well, people have particular objectives because there's confusion in mind, like Mr. Damodaran said, whether I represent a particular interest or represent the company. But on a board, you represent the company. Company comes first, your personal interest comes second. If the company does well, your personal interest is taken care of. Now, when there's a conflict of interest between what your personal interest is and what the company interest is, you must talk it over or recuse and let the others decide. That's the right way to do it. Because if you start pushing your side and others succumb, you're obviously destroying value. The biggest thing to understand is there are multiple people on the board, multiple interests who have different kind of interests, and you've got to reconcile them. And for all of that, you need a good chairman. The key thing is the chairman, the tone at the top, the culture at the top, where there is openness and everybody can talk, everybody can listen, and you allow them to take it out and then discuss it and come to a consensus, which may not be the optimal solution, but which is something that is the interest of the company and that can be done. And it can only happen by a dialogue. But you need a strong chairman who will not succumb to any temporary interest, but we are a business. So when you get a momentary chance to do something, go ahead and do it. There's nothing wrong in it. But it could hurt the sustainability sometime. But, that's how we reconcile.
Right. So just harping on the point of the chairman, this actually brings me to my next question, which is to Sir. So you sat on the you've been the chairman of various listed companies who have also gone through transition issues, as well as they've gone through challenges that are endemic to running a business as well. But one thing we noticed is that managing a board meeting is actually a masterclass in human psychology. because you're managing egos as much as you're managing value and the like. That's actually there. And more than, even though there are a lot of statements about a chairman being a lodestar, a captain, etc., I personally view the chairman of the board as a ringmaster of a circus, or as a person who has to mediate amongst a loose confederation of warring tribes that are primarily the board members of these companies. Now, this is something that someone of your gravitas and stature can master because you've been through these kind of situations in the past. But there are numerous young entrepreneurs now, some of them freshly out of college, 2-3 years, etc., and whereas the investors are the ages of their fathers or grandfathers or something of the same. But how do these young entrepreneurs equip themselves with the confidence to end up actually managing these large level of these types of investors, and just to help them actually navigate the kind of ego battles that end up playing out? Because sometimes on the board is not about who's right, but just about getting my vote across. It's similar to what you said. There are some people who have something to say, and some people have to say something. But if the person who has to say something is also the person who's going to cut you the next check, there's obviously a power dynamic in that also needs to be addressed.
That's a very interesting question. An answer to this can keep us here till tomorrow. But I'll attempt a slightly shorter answer. But to comment on what you asked, MDP, earlier, on the lack of alignment in the boardroom, I sometimes wonder whether there was an alignment of expectations before people got into this relationship, or did you understand things differently? What lawyers, I'm sure there are enough lawyers here, was there consensus ad item? Were we talking about the same thing? Did we understand each other? Or was my analytical ability overwhelmed by the entrepreneur's articulation? That is something which, from the outside, I have often wondered. As for your question on chairing, I think, young people, let's get to why people set up businesses, young people. I'm not talking about older people. 1996, how many years ago was that? 23 and 4, 27 years ago. 27 years ago, Sri Lanka won the World Cup in cricket. Sri Lanka, some of you who, you're a little too young to have actively followed it, but maybe if you look at old reports, will see that Sri Lanka had a captain called Arjuna Ranatunga, later got into politics, etc. He was built along somewhat generous lines. If you looked at him, you wouldn't think he was a cricketer or a sportsman, right? And there was, while people talk about top lines and bottom lines, he should have focused on the middle line, which he did not anyway. But he was a great captain. And when they got to the finals, the Australian team looked at him, laughed and said, how can this guy play cricket? He seems physically unfit. Look at the size of his stomach. And he made a comment which I think is a comment for all time. He said, it's not the size of your stomach which is important, it's the fire in the belly. And it is that fire in the belly that sets the entrepreneur away from the rest. People like me who've done a job and have reached not the winter of our discontent, but the autumn of our contentment. Winter is a little far away. So we are not cut out to be entrepreneurs. There must be something in some people that makes them entrepreneurs, the fire in the belly, I imagine. Now, if a young person sets up this company and then suddenly you realize, no, I can't do it all by myself, I need a board, then the task is, as you said rightly, get the right chairman. That chairman might be one generation older than you. But it must be somebody, he may not even be a domain expert, that's not important. You get a domain expert, it can be counterproductive because he could start questioning your expertise and then you will have other kinds of problems in the boardroom. But someone who has domain familiarity, shouldn't be a stranger to the domain, he must know the language that's being spoken without being an expert. But most important, what defines the chairman is maturity. Now, when I talk in terms of managements and boards, I say that management is the seat of knowledge. They're the guys that are running the company. They have all the information. They know this domain. They know everything. The board is the seat of wisdom. It's not the seat of knowledge. Which is why when you craft strategy, for example, if a board thinks that it can craft strategy, it cannot. The first draft of strategy must come from management. The board are at best co-creators of strategy when you work with management, because both have to co-own it in the interest of the company. So you need to get mature kind of leadership. The boardroom is not the easiest place to be in. I've been chairman of a board where, even if I don't take names, I think you people will know, one co-founder at 38% and the other at 36%. And they were at daggers drawn. The point that I made, you may disagree without being disagreeable, was sacrificed. There was a lot of disagreeable conversation in the boardroom, and it was my job to steer that ship through this, ensure that while boardroom battles will continue to be fought, you can't wave a magic wand, operations of the company don't suffer. The business has to continue because you have stakeholders that need to be catered to, no matter that you have two people who are fighting here. It was tough. It was not the easiest. Sometimes you yourself have to be rude in order to combat rudeness. It's not something that comes to me easily, so I had to cultivate that in order to deal with people that were, misbehaving, for want of a better word, in the boardroom. But the important thing is, even in the midst of all that, how do you extract value? You hear both these guys, they're talking different things, they're going at each other. If there wasn't a table between them, they would actually have gone physically for each other. You don't want to be, you said you don't want to be caught in the middle. I was in the middle at that time, so nothing was flying around, I assure you. We ensured that that didn't happen. So I think there are challenges. It will happen more when you have external compulsions. I am an investor. I need to exit by such and such time. I am not seeing the kind of valuation by that time. Nevertheless, I need to exist because I have a constituency back home. But you would like not to be disrupted at that stage. And then you have conversations which are not the most pleasant of conversations, which I think begins with not having an alignment of expectations and not having continuing conversations along the way. I'm a great believer not in one-time conversation. Conversation has to be continuing. If conversation is not constructive and if it's not a continuing conversation, you will never be able to address the contradictions that exist in the boardroom. At the end of the day, these are people with two different sets of objectives. One has this dream. He wants to convert that dream into a reality while the fire keeps burning. It's like the Olympic flame. It won't go away. It's still burning in your stomach, right? At the same time, there's another guy who says, look, I am the guy that cut the check. My understanding was that you will give me an exit by such and such time. And then there could be unpleasantness. So there are lots of things you need to address along the way as you address your business requirements, growing business, looking for new markets, hiring the right people, and creating a kind of an ecosystem in which, as Jeremy Bentham said, the greatest good of the greatest number. There will be some people whose interests are not aligned, but by and large, you are able to get a buy-in from more people. There's a possibility. There's no certainty in this business. There's a possibility that somebody would come in. I think a lot of it would depend on having the right leadership in the boardroom. Sometimes what happens, and I'm going back to a question that was raised earlier, sometimes what happens is simple things like the seating arrangement in the boardroom. I'll give you a personal example. We were doing consulting for a board, and we found everybody's name plates were there. So you had the chairman, next to him the managing director's position, the company secretary there, and a few executive management people on this side, management people on the board, and on this side you had 5 independent directors on this side of the table, right? So when we were looking at how to improve board processes, looking at that, inside all of us, no matter what our age, there is a child that's mischievous. So sometimes that child tends to come out. So I went to that boardroom 10 minutes before everybody else came and rearranged all the names, right? Like a child playing with a new set of toys. I kept the chairman where he was, the MD where he was, the company secretary where he was, and shuffled all that. And then we had signed an NDA and we were allowed to sit in the boardroom. So we were sitting in the corner, not at the main table. We were observers, right? So we were sitting in the corner, and I noticed people coming into the boardroom, looking at, somebody's moved this. I used to sit here because for years he's been sitting there. For years I've had Siddarth sitting next to me, right? And I suddenly discover, he's not here. He's gone somewhere else. Somebody's come here. What that did, it looked like a game. What that did was, it introduced a kind of what I call a constructive disruption in the boardroom. So the groupthink that was mentioned earlier, groupthink among other things arises from, I go and sit with the same people on the same side of the table, and as somebody once told me, he said, because clause 49 in the listing agreement was given effect to by me when I was SEBI chairman. And he said, you have created an opposition party in the boardroom. Right? Till now, my company was running well. There was no problem. You said, I need to have independent directors. You created an opposition party. These guys are opposing everything. I say, that's not the job of the director. Anyway, but I think the challenges in the boardroom are many. And continuing conversation, anticipating the pain points, addressing them outside of the boardroom. The best conversations are never had in the boardroom, they are had outside the boardroom. In fact, the most valuable conversations are when you take a tea break or a coffee break. That is when you get to hear people because people drop their, guard and communicate a little better.
Siddarth, I want to add here, I was in the Kelkar committee set up by the government with Vijay Kelkar as chairman. There are many of us with disparate interests on a tax reform committee. Kelkar had a very nice way of handling this as chair. He let everybody talk, and we had vehemently opposing views. I once remember Urjit Patel, who become governor of the Reserve Bank, once almost came to hit me. Because I was saying that you must have tax breaks for IT. He said, no, you should not have.
That's foolhardy. He's so small built.
Yeah, maybe the fire that he had at that point of time, or maybe his foolishness. Then we became good friends. But he was very vehement with all of us. He let us talk. Never stopped us. Allowed whatever time. He kept his counsel himself. At the end of it, he listened to everybody, wrote the report exactly the way he wanted, and all of us signed. Even though the report said he must withdraw the tax break for IT companies, I signed. And he signed. We all signed. And why was that? Because we were heard. See, in a board, you have to hear everybody, give voice to everybody.
Yes.
None of them expect what they want will be done by the chair of the company. But they want to be heard and their views to be taken into consideration for that. It could be part of the culture for Indians that, we go before the king and we want to be heard and then go back. Even the king doesn't agree. We will tell all of them, Maine bola. Maine bola hai.
Sunwai.
Sunwai. लेकिन करते नहीं मुझे पता नहीं लेकिन मैंने बोला है. I think it's a very important part of human psychology. Yes. Don't suppress anybody. Talk it over. And Ramchandra Guha told me another interesting thing which I try to follow. He said Gandhiji never broke off dialogue with anybody who had opposing views. He carried on unending dialogue with them, never broke off. At the end of it, either he changed or the others changed. And that's what he said. We need to talk, we need to discuss, we need to have consensus. And if you get consensus for 80-90%, there's a big problem. But we need to talk, we need to ideate, we need to discuss. That has to take a lot of time, and that takes a lot of time. And you need a chair who allows everybody to talk, everybody to do that. At the end of that, the chair takes a decision. I'll make another point. In Infosys, we had Narayan Murthy, very tough man. But in a meeting with everybody, anybody could talk, oppose him and fight, vehemently discuss. And he tries to build a consensus. The consensus is not there, he goes to the best idea. Which are the best idea? But the rule was very clear. Once he decides on behalf of everybody, you jolly well obey and nothing more, no opposition. Because at the end of it, if there's no consensus, one person has to decide. And he was the chair. So he has to decide. And he will do no wrong. So it went like that. So the chair and the methodology and everything, understanding that is important. Startups are not going to get good chairs. Right? It's going to be the founder, chairman, managing director. Or it's going to be some investor who's never run a company before. And who has never run a board before. So it is a very difficult process. And that's why I think most companies require a mentor. And that's why this sort of board committee you alluded to earlier may be a good idea. We don't have a board liability, but you can really make some contribution.
No, very true, because with great power comes great responsibility, but also great liability as well.
I had only one sentence when you described the way Murthy functioned, allowed everybody to talk, then took the decision.
No. The best idea.
The best idea.
No consensus.
I am tempted to again say that we must go to the dictionary. So you are a democrat for a long time, then you became dictator. That's the order in which it comes.
You are a democrat so long as there's a debate,
Yes.
a consensus develops.
Correct. Yes.
One, there is no consensus.
You have to take a decision.
Take a decision. You have to decide.
take a decision. That is it. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, of course, no. No, just one thing to also note, a number of the regulators and government also follow the Kelkar committee process, where they call all of us from Bangalore, Bombay and everything to Delhi. Give us a cup of tea, hear us out, but then decide to act however they choose to in the best interest of their constituents. Just speaking about the point of the advisor, where you said it's similar to what we said about what I just said about with great power comes great responsibility, but also great amount of liability. You've recently been appointed as the advisor to a very prominent Indian startup that is undergoing a very severe public scrutiny of every one of its actions, and that level of microscopic scrutiny is something that's always counterintuitive to business and ends up shaking confidence to a large extent. You were also approached by them to help them to get through this. And this is one of the worst nightmares of not just a startup or a founder, but also of any investor who's been on that board and is also liable under the Companies Act, regardless of what agreements say about certain actions and certain whatever that's actually happened. My question is actually twofold. When should a founder actually realize that they end up needing external help? Because there's always a cult of the founder that's been built, saying that the founder is the man running the company is the founder is the company. Similar to India's Indira, Indira is India. The false equivalence has become very prevalent as a sort of cult that's actually been developed there. But when can a founder ask for help without being perceived not as being omnipotent or omnipotent for that matter? And two, what are the lessons that startups should actually learn from this and to avoid such a situation where there's been such a massive erosion of trust, not just with the board or investors, but also with all stakeholders, the media, clients, and everyone else in general? It's a very negative perception. There's not right or wrong. It's just a perception that's there. Perception ends up trumping reality to a large extent.
Siddarth, today it is good that many young people want to be entrepreneurs. They have fire in the belly. They're able to raise capital. They run businesses. They become very successful. They run huge amount of money and grow their companies. It happens in the market economy, and it'll happen when you're disruptors. As they go along the journey, they must reflect once in a while to understand what their strengths are and what is it that they lack. It's very important to step back and think about it and to understand yourself. And I think that is very important for all of us individuals. The old story about Alexander the Great, who came to India, defeated Purushottama and the Indus, and then his troops rebelled. He was injured and he was sulking in a camp, and the troops were wanting to go back to Greece. And at that point of time, with resting, he saw in the distance in this camp a holy man going somewhere. He sent his troops to ask them to come. And the holy man refused. And then he sent his troops to bring him. So this person comes here. Alexander says, I asked for you to come. Why didn't you come? He said, why should I come? Who are you? I'm Alexander the Great, conqueror of the world. Then this person laughed loudly. Why are you laughing? Oh, Alexander, conquer yourself, the greatest of all conquest. So the problem is our inadequacy, our lack of understanding and lack of maturity, lack of exposure, the fears and the emotions that we go through. And we must realize that ourselves for a better impact. Some of us hide it because, like you say, we are superstar, we don't want to show weakness. Some of us cannot articulate it, it bottles up inside. And some of us are just plain unable to understand why others don't agree with you. So it's an individual journey that has to happen. And it's the role of other members of the board to talk and ideate and get it out and discuss and do it in a manner where people feel is their interest. You can't be confrontationist. You can't go on picking holes. You can't go on destroying a persona and reducing confidence. You can't do that. And once you do that, the conflict deepens and there's mistrust between both sides. Because one person has to run the business, grow the business, and he's not getting support. Everybody is doing pinpricks. So you feel like the person is walking the plank with all the investors putting the sword at the back, and you're the only one to jump. And that creates a paranoia in the mind. You understand? And that is very important for people to understand. You have to seek help, you have to understand, and you must listen to people, and that takes time. I mean, young people, you don't understand that because all of us are young, we're very aggressive, we want to win all arguments, we always think we are right. It's in the nature of the beast, correct? And I think that is a very important thing, and they must decide when the right time, or the other members of the board should also ask for somebody to do. And I think it helps to have a grey head on the board sometime. When you come to a particular size, get somebody from the outside who's a little bit away and who really can be a sounding board. You need a sounding board. Everybody needs a sounding board. I think that is an important thing that they have to do. Now, as to the second point, what are the lessons you can learn? One, when you have very fast growth, the processes and the mechanism for growth are not should be built along with the same journey. I remember, we were $190 million in 2000. By 2004, we became $1 billion in Infosys. And 2006, I think we became $2 billion. What we did in 24 years, we did in 24 months to add $1 billion. But we always planned ahead, build everything else. We discussed, we planned and we built it and built mechanism, built the boards. We did everything else because we are thinking, how do you manage? Now you've suddenly grown, you don't have the processes, you don't have the team, and you don't have people to advise you, you don't have the governance mechanism, and you're far ahead, right? And people are egging you on, you're so successful. The bravado takes over. And that is when the gap between what you have to do at that size and what you are doing becomes wider and it falls apart. All it takes is a bad year for it to fall apart. With the good times, everything rises. All ships rise when the tide comes in, right? And it rises. So you've got to understand that. So there has to be, like you said, a creative tension between the board and the entrepreneur, which is not there. And that is also there because the entrepreneur does not understand, neither the board understands. And the board has a different objective of making money, valuation, getting money, which is very important. They're judged by the money that they make, not by the dialogue they have. And the entrepreneur is feeling that I'm able to succeed, I can grow, and business, a linear equation keeps going up and up and up and up and up. I mean, the world only has $102 trillion of GDP, right? India is only 3.4 trillion, right? So, you got to understand that. So that's exactly what happened. The gap widened, system process not there, and the board mechanism didn't work to moderate, and things broke down. And now we are trying to mend that. I don't want to blame anybody because, these things happen. And we are all victims of the market, or beneficiaries of the market. The market goes through irrational exuberance when everybody is coming and giving you money. Like Trump said, when he was asked why he took the money from the bank, so much of money, he said, what can I do? They're waiting to give me all the checks. I told them no, but they kept pushing and I took it. So you can't blame Trump, right? You got to blame the other side too. So I'm saying these things happen, but the key thing is you must understand when you need help, call in help and work together, rebuild trust. It's a long journey and it's a very painful journey.
Just one supplementary comment. What are organizations about? You got people, products, processes, policies. There is a sense of purpose. The problem with startups, etc., and this is a problem which a lot of us have, we think passion is a very good thing. But passion has its place. So you can't decide passionately. My advice to young people is decide objectively, implement passionately. Your decision ought to be objective. Otherwise, you're missing out this entire, you sacrifice purpose. Some bright idea gets into your head, you think, I need to do it as of yesterday. you're not thinking through this, objectivity in decision making, passion at the time of implementation. And to the first point you made, that when you're growing, you don't sit and reflect on it. I think the best example is God. 6 days he created the world, he rested on the seventh day. What was he doing when he was resting? He was thinking about, what did I do in the last 6 days? Have I let a lot of mischief afoot that I need to control? So he was in the consolidation phase on the seventh day. We think he was resting. God never rests. He's got a lot on his plate. But sometime you need to take a deep breath and think about, Acha, I've reached here. This is what I set out to do. This is what I've got right. Celebrate success. The other problem that we have, and these restaurants used to have a board. As you are exiting the restaurant, you used to see that small restaurants in small towns. If you are happy, tell others. If you are unhappy, tell us. Right? They used to have that on the board as you were exiting. So celebrate success publicly. Differences must be not discussed in newspapers. Unfortunately, the startup world is discovering differences being discussed in newspapers. That is not something that's good for the company.
Very true. So just coming to the question of, you've spoken about the talent pool of startups where the founders, often the chairman, MD and everything, the end all be all of the company. Whereas most corporate governance theory always expounds upon the need to have independent directors and have someone independent on these boards. But economic theory, which clashes with governance at times, also states that everyone needs an economic incentive in order to perform, which is why skin in the game is paramount for anyone. A founder who doesn't have skin in the game will leave and recreate value. An investor who doesn't have skin in the game can end up being reckless with managing people's investments on that. But this sort of independence, everyone looks at independence as the end-all and be-all of governance. But the question is, can a person who's truly independent and divorced from the outcomes of the decisions that he's a part of truly represent the interests of people, of all the shareholders in that particular company? Because shareholders don't have a voice on these matters. Then obviously the economic consequences of this is something that they end up suffering without having a vote on that particular part. So how would you end up addressing, is independence the end all and be all of good governance, or would someone with a stronger economic incentive have better alignment with the company and the decisions being taken, such that he ends up being a little more circumspect about it without actually eroding value that would hurt him personally?
No, I think you put it very well. I sometimes think that if somebody from the moon, and it's likely it'll happen maybe in a few years, visited us and looked at the corporate structure, he would think that companies are run by independent directors and audit committees. That managing directors, management, etc. have nothing to do with this. Because the amount of emphasis on the role of the independent director and the audit committee, you would think these guys are running the company, right? Now, independent directors might not have skin in the game. But the reason they are in that boardroom is because those that brought them into the boardroom thought that they could add value. So they can serve as a moderating influence. There is a very interesting expression used in the SEBI regulations. I've never understood it. It says, undue optimism. I have never figured out what is undue optimism. You're optimism or you're not optimism? What is undue optimism? So there are a few such things. I won't delay you with that. But I think when you are the person that has this vision, I want to reach here, this is my product, nobody else has this, or this is my process, nobody else has this, and I want to do this and grow fast. The problem is that you don't need speed breakers, but it's useful to see that somebody sees you don't accelerate and get out of control. And that is a role that the independent directors play in the boardroom. They might not have any skin in the game, right? But if you select the right people, they will ensure that the legitimate aspirations of those with skin in the game are only supported and not obstructed. But for that, you need to get the right people into the boardroom. You are right when you talk in terms of these people being given more importance. The reasons for it. I mentioned Gandhiji at the beginning of my talk. If Gandhiji had to actually say, that businessmen are trustees, they're repositories of trust, why was it necessary to say that? Because historically, India has distrusted businessmen. That distrust is what finds expression in all the controls, the checks, the balances, all of what you have in laws and regulation. Take related party transactions. The amount of restrictions that have been put on related party transactions, you would get the feeling that if they didn't exist, the promoter would run away with this. But if a promoter actually has set up a company, let's at least give him or her the benefit of the doubt that this has been done for the long term to survive that individual, so that creates an institution. But we think that this is, a crook who might disappear overnight. And if your entire regulatory and legal system is premised on that, you clearly will have a problem. I think what is important is to see that everyone that is in the boardroom and outside works towards a common purpose. The roles might be different. Everybody is not doing the same thing. In a football team, everybody doesn't play goalkeeper. There's some people have to score goals also. So everybody has different responsibilities, but they're all batting on the same side. If that doesn't happen, there will be some discord, some disruption. There will be need for discussion. There will be need for debate. Occasionally, there will be need for dissent. I worry about the Reserve Bank of India saying, if you disagree, immediately dissent. But after disagreement comes dialogue, then discussion, debate, and then only if necessary you dissent. You don't rush to dissent, right? So you have to see that these conversations lead to the company's interests getting addressed. If we have too many regulations, that is why I am a great votary of writing regulations in simpler English, writing less regulations, junking a whole lot of what is past sell-by date, having a sunset clause on every regulation so that you're obliged to revisit it for contemporary relevance. If you wrote it 10 years ago and then it remains on your books. And we've had laws, for example, which didn't make sense. There was a law from British times, been scrapped only a few years ago, which said that every eating place should have a source of water where a horse can be taken to drink. So if you go to this hotel, for example, and you come with a horse, you can go to the manager and say, my horse wants to drink water. Where is that source of water? I am told it was done in Hyatt Regency in Delhi, and the very resourceful manager told the police officer who brought the horse that you take it to the swimming pool, let him drink as much water as you want. So, but you have laws of that kind also. So you take out all that junk that you don't need, write simpler regulations, have sunset clauses, and that is the only way you can have a meaningful regulatory regime. Because you shouldn't lose sight of the objective. Why are you writing regulation? You're writing it ostensibly to improve the ease of doing business. And every regulation that you write is one more hurdle in the way. So I think for the startups, etc., the problems are more complex. Because, let me confess, the universe of regulators will not have first-hand experiences on startups. So what is the wisdom on the basis of which those regulations are being done? And you mentioned you get called to meetings, you get tea. I hope the tea quality is good. And then they do whatever they like. That's called consultation, not concurrence. You don't have to concur. You're only being consulted. That's all that is being done.
Siddarth, I want to add another interesting thing. High growth creates an expectation gap. Let us ask a person who's created a decathlon or a $10 billion company in 7-8 years. what do you think, what do outsiders and others think he should be? Obviously, he has not grown to the stage when he can meet the expectations that people have, because you're a superstar, you created value, you are very rare, maybe a handful, or maybe a few tens of people, and high expectations are very high. And when expectations get high, the gap gets high. And that is the problem. Yes. We grow at a particular pace. When companies grow at a much faster pace, the growth of the company outpaces our ability to grow and to manage. And that is the expectation gap. And the way to bridge the expectation gap is to create structures, processes, and teams which can map that, and for the individual facing that, to make sure that he consults people or talks to people to solve his dilemmas. And he must be honest enough to admit, I will become CEO, founder of a $10 billion company, but do I have the capability? Bandwidth. What am I doing? But there's a honest dialogue that you must have. And that is something that you have to question yourself to be successful. I mean, you see what happened in Google, right? Both the guys stepped down. That's a brilliant decision, right? I mean, Bill stayed on a bit too long. And you saw what happened. Many companies, they stayed till long till they kicked out. Correct? So you got to know when to go. So I think there's the expectation gap, especially for high growth companies, all of them. I mean, suddenly become 1 billion, 2 billion. I mean, do you have the capacity to run that, manage that? You might have. There's no doubt you might have. There's no doubt you're successful.
Yes.
That is not the point. The point is that then you have to understand that and build the structure. That's why boards, processes, all that you have to spend a little bit of time in doing. And that's the role of the investors who sit on the board to make sure it happens, to create sustainable value. The tragedy in India is the investors who sit on board also, people who never built companies, most of them are very young. They never face dilemmas. They think life is a linear equation.
I wouldn't equate age with experience.
No.
A very
experience is 1 year's work repeated n number of times.
Yes.
But I won't say that. I said exposure. You can use the right words.
We'll edit that in post.
Experience is the name you give not only to your mistakes, but the mistakes of others that you can learn from. That is experience.
And so it's always cheaper to learn from other people's mistakes than your own as well. We should. So just coming to the last few questions, then we'll open up to the audience also. So you've also been a regulator, so there has to be a question on regulations. Despite it being a small part of your career, there has to be a question on that.
76 years, I spent 3 years in regulation.
Yes.
And I keep getting asked this. So from a regulator's perspective, I said, what about my other 73 years? It's all written off.
So the one thing we've always seen, especially in the theory of jurisprudence, there's always a carrot and the stick. But in India, unfortunately, we've seen both the carrot and the stick being weaponized against the intended recipients of the regulations that are there. For example, you go to the Companies Act. The Companies Act is something not many people know. But in case a company makes a mistake in terms of its investments, either disclosures doesn't meet the free reserve norms or anything that's there, the fine is actually a two-year jail term for any of the officers who have actually committed that act. Whereas in the Macaulay Indian Penal Code, the jail term for manslaughter is also 2 years. So we are the only country in the world that's actually equated a civil I would say misdemeanor to a criminal act that's a tantamount to actually end up taking up a life. That actually comes as part of that. It reminds me of a Kannada phrase known as Gubbi Mele Brahmastra. It means something that's so small you end up using a nuclear weapon, or it's basically a newt. It's completely disproportionate. That comes as part of that. When you speak to regulators or anyone, even lawyers, they say this is a deterrence. This is to ensure that everyone walks the straight and narrow. No one actually deviates off that particular path. But what we've often seen is the people who want to commit these sort of bad acts will continue to do so. And the tragedy of the commons applies on the people who are compliant, who slowly see the cost of compliance increase, the onerous nature of compliance increase, the number of scrutiny notices ends up increasing. It just becomes harder for them to end up actually managing that. From a philosophy perspective, how do we transition to a system that actually rewards good behavior, as opposed to one that only looks to punish bad behavior? Because we have the tail wagging the dog, where one or two instances of any sort of abuse end up actually becoming a law that has unintended consequences across a wide industry. We've seen this happen with agent tax, even under the private placement norms where Sahara violated the private placement norms. We've seen the private placement regulations become so onerous, startups opted for a rights issue, which was never actually the intention of that. So how do we transition to some of this? And even as your role as a regulator in some of these bodies, what were the kind of discussions you had to justify these sort of high level of, I would say, criminal acts or criminal convictions being applied to what are essentially civil misdemeanors.
You referred to the Companies Act. I don't know whether you are aware that it is called the Triple S Act. Satyam, Sharda, Sahara. So it is on the basis of these three that you've actually had several provisions inserted in the Companies Act. But I'll park that for the moment. I think the good news in recent times is the continuing attempt to decriminalize a number of offences which were actually in the 2013 Act visited with penal consequences of that kind. So a lot of that has been taken away. Much more needs to be done. The distrust element ought to be addressed because all of this actually is based on distrust, right? The punishments, wherever they are absolutely necessary, you got to look at whether the punishment is in sync with the nature of the offense. Sometimes in the earlier days, I know, even technical offenses you got penalized for. The two problems that regulatory organizations in India face, one is peculiar to India, is that decisions taken by the regulator are also called into question and then investigative agencies are set after them. So therefore what happens is that regulators, if they start an investigation and find that there is no merit in it, they won't close it. They will keep it because if they close it, somebody will ask them, but you started this with some material, why did you close it? I know because I had to struggle with this problem when I told people, why are you taking all of this? We had one peculiar case, 8 digits, 2 numbers got transposed. And this was before my time, but it surfaced when I was there because I got a representation. Some elderly lady, she said, "This elsewhere I have written the numbers right. Here it got transposed." He said, take out all these small cases, allow people to settle it so that you focus on what is systemically important. What you need to do is to come to a conclusion regarding a case which is big, has systemic implications so that an adverse finding serves as a signal to the rest of the people in the marketplace. That is the objective. Now, even if you look at criminal law, and you mentioned criminal law, the approach now is reformatory. It is not punitive. And I suppose laws like, the Contract Act, the Companies Act, etc., must move more towards reformatory and educative rather than criminalizing offenses. It's happening, not at a pace at which I would like to see it happen. The good news is it's happening. The bad news is it's going very slowly.
One last question that I have, and I'm actually going to give this to MDP. There's one of the most important principles of governance is actually transparency and disclosure. But transparency and disclosure also for companies that have trade secrets, companies that require secrecy in order to compete and in order to actually become of a sizable size where they have the resources and everything else. Transparency actually ends up becoming anathemic to them. So how does a founder end up managing and what also happens as a consequence is the other side may not be as knowledgeable about the offense for that matter. I'll give you the case of an example. If an income tax notice comes to a company, every investor writes over there, if any notice comes over whatsoever matter, you bring it to my notice. And the way our income tax notices are written is as though they're a judge, jury, executioner, and they're carrying out the sentence right then and there itself. There's no threshold being given there. There's no asking for questions. But so founders are often very hesitant to end up disclosing this because non-resident investors who believe the Indian tax department has a certain reputation will end up overreacting to a large extent to seeing what, as in the business called routine notices, end up coming. Everyone gets a notice. It's a badge of honor. As you become larger, you get more notices, and your compliance team increases as part of that. So how does one manage this tension between disclosure and transparency without it adversely affecting operations?
Siddarth, some things have to be disclosed because you have an agreement. You got to keep the agreement. Now, some things, some people can look at it as a very big thing instead of a routine exercise, like you said. Then what I would suggest to work is that you have a tax advisors who look at it and immediately give an opinion and say, we received this notice and we have this opinion of tax advisor, blah, blah, blah. We'll take care of it. So it becomes information. You understand? For example, if the ED comes to you, everything gets, ED, GD, BD and all that kind of stuff, right? There may be a routine inspection, right? But everybody gets worked up because they don't know. That's where you explain to them that we got this notice, we went to tax council immediately and they opine this is how it is, so that tempers come down, because all of them want an expert opinion to protect themselves. Because the fear for them is, because we are fiduciary agents, this has come, what will happen to us in our firm if we don't react strongly? That is the reaction that comes out most times. So you've got to learn how to handle it by making sure that you also protect their interest by getting an expert opinion and doing it and setting up a process. The reality of life is compliance is hard. There are going to be things happening and it's going to be routine. And like you said, the bigger you are, the more you are the target of getting this. You've got to learn to live with it. Now, when it comes to certain very secret processes, you've got to define them and talk to the board and the chairman and keep it secret. For example, the Coca-Cola formula. I don't think the board knows about the Coca-Cola formula, right? It is the center of that company. The board doesn't know. Can you say you're not open, transparent, collegial, you're not made proper disclosure? No. Why? Because it is so secret that it has to be done in a particular way. You explain to them the rationale for it is okay. It cannot be too much. For example, if you have some kind of innovation which is so very good, you don't want to break it, you don't have to disclose it. I mean, that's a business secret, right? So there are disclosure items which you must do, compliances, law and everything else. The business issue which could impact the enterprise which you have to disclose, and you've got to say whether it's adverse. But there are business secrets which are there which you don't have to, I don't think you have to disclose. Because it's got nothing to do with anything except that it helps you become more competitive. Now, somebody, third party at board knowing it, is it going to add value? No. Is it going to add value to them? I don't think so.
But what do you do when you're in doubt, when you're not sure whether you should disclose or not?
Well, disclose or talk to somebody else, the chairman or somebody, and both of you discuss and do it. When you're in doubt, you need to talk to somebody or disclose.
Earlier, it used to be said, when in doubt, disclose. Now there is a doubt about that. Whether that is the correct thing. What is happening.
When in doubt, disclose means when a bad event happens, you disclose or not before others say, you got to do it. So you got to apply judgment.
Absolutely. No, I think the problem is going to get compounded with these latest instructions that if there is a rumor, you can't ignore it. You can't say we don't comment on market rumors, but you got to respond. What happens if you are in the initial stages of an acquisition and somebody writes that in the newspapers? You can't say yes, you can't say no. So, earlier you could have just ignored it because it might not happen. You're still in the early stages. So, I think Justice Brandeis of the United States Court at the turn of the century, last century, he put it very well when he said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. What he did not say, but what I am telling you now, is sunburn can be harmful. So be careful how much you disclose. Sunlight is fine, but if you get too close to the sun, you'll get burnt. So don't get into that space. Yeah.
So with that, I'll open it up to the audience for any audience questions that were there. Yes, Suri.
So far, Mohan, the entire conversation, Mr. Damodaran, has been about the board. So I think in India, the question I'd like to ask, the bigger issue is governance in government, governance with government institutions. Shouldn't that be fixed first before you look 3 steps below? Because in my limited experience, having run a business there, run a business here, that to me is where the rubber hits the road. Thank you.
You know, long ago, your question is music to my ears. Long ago, I mentioned to a group of senior government officials who were all senior to me, I was still part of the system, that government and governance are 2 different terms. And you cannot read governance into government. So I didn't become very popular with that statement, not that I was seeking popularity. I was at the Indian School of Business some couple of decades ago. I was sitting in the audience happily, and the discussion was on corporate governance, and somebody actually asked a question, when there is no governance in the country, why do you need corporate governance? which is exactly what you're saying. But if you waited for government to set the example, we won't get started. I'll give you an example. Forget what is done in the political space and all of that. I don't understand politics. I have served for more than 40 years in the government system without being identified with any political party. So I've survived. I might not have prospered, but that's all right. I'm not complaining, right? So I think the real issue is if you look at the public sector. I'll give you two examples. When SEBI prescribed, and it was during my time, that you needed to have independent directors in listed entities, the public sector persons said, no, we can't do this. They made representations to me saying that we must either be exempted from this or we should be given a long extension of time. So I said, no extension, no exemption, you comply. They started telling me, look, we don't appoint directors. We have to go to the minister. Minister takes his own time. I said, I don't regulate ministers. I'm regulating your company. I will fine you. Then you go and tell your minister you got fined because decision didn't get taken. So we issued notices to the top 5 public sector by market cap. Then my term came to an end. I don't know what happened after that. It doesn't interest me. I've always believed the way God constructed us, it's easier to look in front than to look behind. So the places burden on your neck, why do this? So I only look in front, I forget about what happened before. The second thing is that you said you needed to have a woman independent director. The last set of people that complied very reluctantly were the public sector undertakings. So you have the government making the law. The government is a major shareholder in these entities, and nobody asks any questions about why the government's instructions converted into law are not being followed by these people. If I was running an exchange, which is a first level regulator, I would have suspended the trading of those things by 1 week. Because that will cause a lot of damage. Even retail investors will get hit. But in the larger interest of the system, you should take 1 or 2 actions like that in order to hit. Just to make it is a late Friday evening, some film producer was asked many years ago, who are the best actresses in India? Right? So he said 1 Kajol, 2 Kajol, 3 Kajol, up to 10. Then he said, after that you can write any name you want. So if you look at governance violations, forget all the companies that we are looking at, with skepticism. 1 to 10 is Government of India. After that, only everybody else, right? They forget the 3 positions on the victory stand. They've taken all the others also. Non-compliance of a high level, no eyebrows raised, no questions asked.
And beyond that, thank you. Just as a quick follow-up, beyond that, to enforce regulations, to bring compliance, you need an honest government. If you don't have that, all this doesn't work, is my opinion.
Sorry, you said you need?
A honest government.
You need an honest government. You need honest enforcers to enforce. Because if you don't have that, I think the system is going to be endemically...
I wouldn't tar everyone with that same brush. There are large pockets of honesty and integrity in these organizations, and they go about the job quite all right. What happens is when somebody steps out of line, it is that same thing about when dog bites man, it's not news, but when man bites dog, it's news. So the guys that step out of line are the ones that get noticed. They're the ones that get commented about. Unfortunately, even the fallacy of hasty generalization, tar everybody with that. This guy is working in this office, therefore he must be a crook. Unfortunately, that is. I was asked at a seminar about 20 years ago, why are governance standards so low in India? This was in the US. So with as straight a face as I could project, I said Enron, WorldCom, Global Crossing. I gave about 8 names from the top of my mind. And if I had researched, I would have had 20 others. I said, to the best of my knowledge, none of them are Indian companies. That's all I said. There was silence, deafening silence in the audience after that. We have a long way to go, but it's not as if we are far behind the others. You look at what is happening in Europe, what is happening in Japan, where the managing director turned whistleblower in that company, and he had to catch a night flight out to London because he was the only non-Japanese in that. I'm forgetting.
Carlos Ghosn.
Yes. No, not Ghosn. Before that, it is a photographic. Yeah, that's right. Yes. See, that is why it's useful to have her in the audience. Yes. Yes. Thanks. Okay. Right. Yeah.
Yes. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, we had a question
hi.
from. We had a question from
question.
him. No, sorry, we had one before, so let's take that and then we'll move to. Yeah.
Not so much as a question, but more as a comment. I think to get the entire discussion back into focus about startups, right? So that's what we're talking about today. But there's a lot that we can learn from legacy companies or the established companies. I've always observed that it is far easier to build sustainable business models as opposed to building sustainable governance systems, right? MDP is here, so he knows what he's done. And when we spoke about disclosures, I think the first step was to ensure that the annual report is pristine, right? It started with that. Then there was a point in time, there was an event when they had to take this call about a large disclosure, which meant letting go of a superstar in the company. That, in fact, I want you to focus on that, MDP, so that people in the startup world understand the dilemmas that were present at that point in time. And the objective is, how do you sensitize startups that, you know, what you're doing is fabulous. By the way, Pranav and Siddarth, hats off to you guys. I don't see any other firm doing this today in the system. We have got examples in the contrary, more than, you know, in the affirmative at this point in time. Having said that, if you can sensitize each one of them in your ecosystem, that the premium that you'll get for governance is far greater than the premium that you'll get for just building business value over a period of time, I think your goal is truly achieved. Right? That said, we have to draw upon case studies. We have to draw upon examples from the past. What was done in such a situation. Right? I think MDP, you are the most qualified to talk about it. Right? You have been part of a system where the governance was at a peak. Then there was some faltering. Let's not get into that side. But the business model is strong. It continues. But the governance actually keeps, you know, it's volatile. Right? Maybe it's settled down now. All I'm saying is, what are the dilemmas there? What is the role of leadership in such a situation? Right? When I talk about disclosure and transparency.
A culture. You got to build a culture, and the culture is based upon your value system. And if your value system is very good, the culture will be built. You need to have an open, transparent, collegial culture in every enterprise. Open to have a free flow of information all across, so there are no barriers for most items, so that people can talk to each other, people can listen to each other, silos are not there for information. Second, it has got to be transparent so that the same information goes to all stakeholders in the right manner and is available to everybody. And the third is collegial, because all of you believe that you're part of the same team and there's no fear. All of us suffer from fear of the hierarchy. And the fear is reinforced by authority. So you've got to create that culture, and that culture can be created at the tone of the top. The tone at the top is extremely important. So it casts an unnecessarily high burden on the founders who are inadequate for the purpose because they don't know what the tone at the top is. The tone at the top becomes evident as to take greater responsibility. You know, I hope Siddarth doesn't bash me about age and all that. But the tone at the top is important. And the tone at the top requires you to lead by example. Leadership by example. Like Mr. Damodaran said, if the top man is very clear, the top team is very clear, it works. And for that, what I would advise all founders is, when you start a company, write down a value document, what is it you believe in? Write down a protocol, how you are going to handle conflicts, personal issues, compensation and all that. Write down in that how you are going to make decision making, how the consultation process, so all of you are very clear. Because that's how we killed an organization. And that's what should be done. Next is, you have to, when you face dilemmas, the value system comes to your, rescue. Because you know what is the right thing. I'll tell you a small instance, sir. One day Murthy came to my cabin and said, Mohan, I was in the NASCOM meeting. Somebody told me about how some of the loans they give are put under something called loans and advances. Do you have something like this? I was shocked. I said, why do you ask? No, they were telling me some of the things they do. I said, sir, if the thought of doing wrong doesn't come to your mind, you'll never do wrong. Thought of doing wrong doesn't come to your mind, you'll never do wrong, correct? Because you always do what is right. And that's a value system that you grow up with, and that you got to cultivate. And second, I'll tell you, there was this case of Parmalat before Satyam. Parmalat was a European Italian company which had $1.5 billion.
Europe didn't want to be left out because US had all these issues at that time. Parmalat came.
$1.5 billion of bank debt didn't exist.
Yeah.
So Murthy went to a meeting and he called me up and said, Mohan, how much money do you have in the bank? I said, 30,000 crores. Are you sure it is there? I mean, I'm the CFO. I signed. Are you sure it is there? He said, why do you ask? No, this Parmalat is come up, so I was asking. I told him, when are you going to come back? I'm going to come back tomorrow. I said, come back tomorrow, and day after, I'll go to the bank, withdraw all the money, and we'll sit and count. What else can I say? But remember, the man asked the question. Now, he knows nothing can be wrong, but he asked the question. Why? He had to ask the question, because something happened somewhere. Oh my God, is it happening here? So, the leader and the tone at the top is important. Then we had this sexual harassment case. And the person involved was a star. You're the great marketing guy, wizard. Everybody had high regard. And Murthy had the highest regard for him compared to everybody, because he's told us that the biggest, most difficult thing in business is getting business, selling. That's the most difficult thing. Raising money and all that is easy. Siddarth will give you a check once in a while. But it's very difficult, right? Selling and getting revenue, something called real revenue, that's very difficult. Now, so he understood what it was, and immediately he thought about it, called a board meeting and asked him to go. 15 minutes. 15 minutes, no debate. And then he sent me to take over. And we were all shocked. Then I was negotiating takeover. I said, oh, you must have 3 months notice. He's worked very hard. Is this? He said, no. Immediately he goes. Nothing more, and that is it. And then we stood up for, we had to have somebody filed a case. We hired a lawyer to defend us, went for mediation and all that. So it happened, and we went through that entire rigor. Then we had to change everything and all that, because we are doing it. So we face these dilemmas, and how you respond to the dilemma is the most important thing. And that comes by moral courage, by a value system, and a sense of responsibility. Now that is an individual attribute. It's an individual attribute.
Absolutely.
And how do you develop the individual attribute? Value system. And do you have a value system? I believe all of us have a value system. The key thing is we must articulate it, write it down when we work with everybody. Suppose I'm a sole entrepreneur and I'm running a business, I can do what I want. When I have a team, there must be consensus ad item.
Absolutely.
Everybody must believe the same thing means the same. So you must write it down, discuss about a team of people and do it. And the culture will protect you most times. Yeah, and you disclose also. And you disclose immediately. And because these are all market information which you go and disclose. Before somebody discloses for you, you disclose. And it works most times. And I think, you learn on the job. I think you learn on the job is something, younger people will make more mistakes because they don't know they made a mistake. When I was younger, I made mistake, but I don't know I made a mistake. I didn't believe it was a mistake. I believe the right thing. We never think of something. You're instinctive in a reaction. When you have got accumulated knowledge about what others have done and think, your neurons connect and you think, oh my God, it happened there. What do I do? How do I do it? It's a journey.
Sir, I would like to double click on the culture part. So there is a hypothetical startup which raises the money from a VC firm, and it has a moral responsibility, and also they need to raise further round of funds. They need to achieve that unicorn status. They need to give the exit to their current investors. So they hire people who are able to deliver. But for them, the culture is the second priority. So what happens? These people are able to deliver the numbers. And this hypothetical startup is going and selling the online courses to these parents by not disclosing the entire information. So this is the downward transient, and on the upward transient, it's the chairman who's having the issue with the revenue recognition, and you know which firm I'm talking about, right? And they hire and they have someone like you and at your stature to join the board. So do you see that there is that fine nuances that maybe it is not as black and white as sexual harassment, but at the same time there is a proper relation between the governance and the culture, where you would have hired a person who is not only delivering you the result, but also at the same time ensure that they're disclosing the full information to these parents as well.
Now, yes, when you have to achieve results, you sometimes become aggressive. And the way to counter that is to have processes and other people and structures like an audit committee chair who can look into it and do it independently, or a CEO who has always got his resignation in his pocket, who could walk apart if you don't listen to him. And if you don't have one, you become the superstar, you could make mistakes. That's point number one. And second is, yes, there's aggression in overselling. Many people have aggression in overselling. And that is something that you're compelled to do because you are judged by revenues, you're judged by this, GMV, and all the kind of stuff, and you sometimes overdo it, right? But I think the key thing is, are the countervailing forces which could put you in check. Sometimes most of the countervailing forces fail. And that's where the problem arises. If the countervailing forces and they're able to check is okay, and the countervailing forces don't work, it's okay. It fails. And if you realize that you made a mistake, it is there. Just the other day I was talking to Rajneesh Kumar, in something, and he made a point in a meeting, and he said, look, when I became chairman, I called everybody, all my insurance companies, said, no mis-selling. I will not accept a single mis-selling complaint. You mis-sell, you're out. I don't care about revenues, no mis-selling. My reputation and brand is more important than any money I make. But there is a person with that kind of stature at the top, right? Now you are young, you're going to be judged by this, correct? You'll sell aggressively, right? But it's a process where you have to work through, and if you get a grievance, you've got to settle it. And that's why this grievance and everything coming to board and others, you have to look through. So it has to be a joint action. Ultimately, it boils down to something called being a fiduciary agent. You understand? See, when you are a sole proprietor, all money is yours. You can do what you want. There's nothing like related party and all that. It's your money. When you take 1 rupee of capital from somebody, you become a fiduciary agent. And as a manager, you have to protect the 100%, including your 99% and the 1%. And the 1% is more important, 99%, when it comes to conflict of interest. So you have to understand a fiduciary responsibility. And that is an educational process that we don't teach in our colleges. We don't teach in our MBA classes or whatever it is. We don't have enough case studies. I think we are just growing. Hopefully it will come with many more discussions like this and interaction like this. But it's a reality we'll face. Let me tell you, it's going to happen again and again and again. The key is, like he said, will it be ampu or too big? Am I right? So long as ampu, small, is fine. We can manage it. It should not become systemic. Individual aberrations will always be there in society. There is no excuse for the individual aberration. There is no excuse for that. But it will happen. We'd accept it and move along and rectify it as we go along. But it should not become systemic. If it becomes systemic, we have a big problem. And that is what you've got to crack down.
I think one more important thing that even with your hypothetical startup example that people fail to understand is the role that regulation and the complexity that comes with actually scaling up a business. For example, that's what it's a revenue recognition sounds like the simplest thing. Money comes in, have I earned it? It's revenue. If I haven't earned it, it's not. If you ever read the accounting standard on revenue or revenue recognition, if you put 20 lawyers and 20 consultants in a room, they'll never be able to reach a conclusion. I doubt even the people who've written that regulation have ever run business to understand whether business models can meet the definitions given over there or not. So these sound really simple when you distill it down to 1 or 2 words. But the complexity and the abstraction that actually rests when running these kind of businesses is huge. For example, even the SEBI regulation, there are 1, 2 words over there saying maintain a high level of governance. So the question is, what is high level of governance? Doesn't mean disclose everything, be hyper aggressive when it comes to that. Then the question becomes, are you running a business to generate a profit, or running a business just to actually do check in the box compliances? That's what ends up happening. We see regulatory creep come in, and as an entrepreneur, you're not expected to be an expert in these. Even the experts are actually experts. I know experts who are experts in one particular part of the Income Tax Act, Section 1995, which is a transfer pricing. They know absolutely nothing about anything else that's there. You get high degree of specificity, but the expectation of the entrepreneur, unfortunately, is he has to master everything and know everything that it takes to run a business. Now, when you rely on external advice, and the advice is wrong, culpability lies with you. Responsibility, shit always flows down. Responsibility always flows up. That's unfortunate.
Look, for all the theory, my friend Venu is here. He runs a business. I talk to him twice a month. Always revenue. He said, Martin sir, I'm doing it, sir. This problem. So we have a continued dialogue. I still want more and more. I'm not going to give up. If I invest in you, I'm going to ask you, where are the revenues? You may not achieve that. It may be very difficult, but I'm not going to give up because that's where I get value. Now, the key thing is to have the ability to understand that you're doing your best. I must put the pressure. You're doing your best. You're achieving something, and I'm willing to accept that. Legitimate. And also to caution you, don't do anything wrong. Of course, I'm going to tell you, don't do anything. I want 100% growth every year. Don't do anything wrong. Don't do mis-selling. Because my conscience has to be clear, right? I'm the greedy, capitalistic venture capitalist who has to pay 25% to IRR and who wants to be in the first 5 funds in the country and all the nice stuff. It makes me feel nice, right? So I'm going to put pressure on you. But I must have the maturity to understand that despite all this, you're doing your best. And understand my own limitation. That's where you should draw the line. It should not be one-sided. And you as a founder should have the ability and maturity to tell me, look, I did my best, I did this, come and explain, and ask me, what can I do better? You got it?
I think you should use a simple test which is called the 2M test. The first M is a mirror. When you're facing a dilemma in decision making, go and look into the mirror and ask the guy whom you see in the mirror whether he's comfortable with the decision. When you see your expression there, you will get to know whether you're getting closer to the right decision or the wrong. That's the first M. Second M is even more important. That is the mother test. Ask your mother whether you're doing the right thing. If the mirror and the mother tell you you're doing right, you'll be invariably right. I don't think you'll get it wrong. And companies need to remember a simple principle. The fish always rots at the top. If companies look at themselves as fish, you'll discover the rot is always at the top. It gets down to the other levels later. So the problem and the solution must be with the guy at the top.
The same is true with government?
Yes. Yes, everywhere.
But
He said the same is true with government.
yes.
So coming back to the boardroom discussion, sir, Mr. Damodaran, first of all, thanks for your enlightening discussion. You mentioned about a slight element of tension between management and the board, which means that interests are not always mutually aligned. There is
No.
The tension is because the expectations are different and you have to sort it out.
So as he mentioned, in Murthy's case, he heard everybody, then decided what among those that surfaced served the interests of the company better. So that is why you need that conversation.
right.
You
So my
need that
question is,
tension. Yeah.
when there is a disagreement between the board and management,
Yes.
and we've had a lot of startups that have differed with their investors who are on the board, and one of the focal areas of difference is the hiring choice. So the board wants to hire somebody and place somebody in the company which the management is not comfortable with. And management may also include some founding people. So when this kind of a conflict arises, where does governance come and who says it finally?
Let's go back to something that I said, and then I'll request him to come in. Companies are about people, products, processes. Even the alphabetical order, people come first. The problems are also with people. If I have a product which only I have today, you will have it tomorrow or day after tomorrow. It's not rocket science. If I have a process which is serving me very well, you can also have it. What you can't copy are my people, right? Because the people are different. You can't take my people and put them in your company. So if you look at people, you must obviously get the right people. The hiring must be right. You must hire the person not because he has a track record. What does the mutual fund industry say? It says past performance is no guarantee of future returns. Doesn't it say that? So you will have great past performance. It doesn't mean that it should. What is it that you're hiring that person for? Does he or she have the potential to deliver on that? Is the person coming across to you as someone who will practice honesty and integrity? If you have a choice between somebody who comes across as a very good person, honest, etc., and is marginally behind the other guy who is, let's say, a street smart guy that might deliver 10% more, I would take the first guy, because you're looking at sustainability, not someone who will come for the short term and go. The end of the day, we need to remember, you lose a few battles, you need to win the war. To win the war, you need to have the right people with the right value system for the long duration.
You see, the investors must realize one important thing. They are not running the business. They invested on the entrepreneur who is running the business. They trust and they have to do. They will advise him, do this, do this. They must not push reluctant people on them or push people on them with their resist. They must refrain and let the entrepreneur decide and respect his decision. If he fails, you cut his neck. Because you trust people on them and entrepreneur says no and he accepts. Tomorrow, it doesn't work. He says, you only appointed him. Why are you asking me? You understand what I'm saying? And if you appoint, get senior people there whom he doesn't want, he's going to fail. They'll make sure it fails. That's human nature. You understand? So you've got to be very careful how you draw the line. You don't override the entrepreneur all the time, or don't override him, because you have to back him. If you make a point up to them, then leave it to him, because he is responsible for results. Are you as an investor responsible for results? No. The entrepreneur is responsible. So you must have the final decision. You must convince him. If he's not convinced, let it be. And later, you have to see what has to be done, right? So another thing I'll tell you, please, don't make an entrepreneur ever the employee. You understand? Don't make him an employee. The entrepreneur must feel it is my company, not as an ego trip, but I have to do everything to protect the company, make it grow. My life is on that. Morning to evening, 24/7, it's got to be in the mind. I got to grow this, I got to build this, I got to do this. That passion, energy is what you're backing. Right, Suri? If that is gone and is there for the salary, it's a 9-to-5 job. They'll all do work-life balance, all the nice stuff, taking people out for parties, increasing, MNCs do that, right? Is that what you want? You're backing an entrepreneur. Make sure the entrepreneur is protected. Make sure his passion is protected. Make sure you discuss with them, reason it out, but let them take the final decision.
Keep the fire burning.
Keep the fire burning. Till it burns him out or you get burnt.
Seen in Valley and here. I mean, my few of the SaaS founder friends in Palo Alto, they have not given the board seat, and they have raised $3 to $5 million, and General Catalyst was the investors. And they have exited very quickly in 18 months to Cisco and all these big firms. So do you think that this ecosystem difference which is there in Indian venture capital ecosystem and Valley is little bit different in terms of asking for the board seat and driving and writing the prescription in all the occasions, what you need to do, how you run the business and all those things? Is a little bit different at equal.
I don't think it's different, because even there, except for the seed round, you always write, I'm a fiduciary agent when you put money. So you got to protect the person. The person will ask you, you put money, what did you do to protect my interest? Well, I had agreements, I had this, I did all the things to justify your fees. I mean, that is it, isn't it? It's there everywhere, right? Because you're a fiduciary agent. Now, when you're seed and all that, you're saying, okay, leka jao, and we'll see later, it works, that's fine. And if people are able to flip and make money, that's fine. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So when you have a long-term relationship, agreements and everything are important, and you don't enforce them, it's meant to be a protection. It's not meant to be a enforcement or a stick to beat people with.
Prescription givers.
What is that?
Prescription givers.
Yeah, it is just a protection mechanism and to step in when they fail.
I think an important thing to also understand from the investor standpoint is no investor gets great thrill in sitting on someone's board or actually putting these kind of clauses in the agreement. All these clauses, if a company operates the way it says it wants to or intends to, none of these clauses will ever come into play. But when the shit actually hits the fan, the question is, what do we end up doing? What is the process? What is the kind of path we need to end up following? That's why the documents are prescriptive, because there's no lack of consensus at that point. When everything's already falling apart, if we don't even know what the next steps are, the inertia and the inaction is something that's going to end up killing the company. So even if it is a cutting off either the founder, removing the errand person, having these sort of larger prescriptive onerous measures, it does give clarity to the business. And I think one thing that's been evident in the market also is if someone who's committed an act of fraud or something remains with the company, even if the business is fantastic, even if they're generating cash hand over fist, everything's going well, the market will never actually reward this company with any sort of value because they don't trust the person who's actually running that show. And in the Valley as well, they do it they do a lot more silently to golden handshakes, golden parachutes. They actually jet the person off.
I'm a founder, but I'm also on boards. I'm always conflicted about this practice of Nemavashi, where you are expected to, as an executive, manage differences of opinion or have some sort of a consensus before you walk into the meeting for the board or the committee. In a way, it's good, it's efficient, it saves time. But in a way, it also causes me a little bit of dilemma because I don't know what the other directors have thought or said because that issue may not always get discussed in that capacity. So just purely as a director, I would love to hear your views on that.
Yeah. What category of director are you on these boards?
So at this point of time, I'm independent director, but in the past when I've been executive, I've also had to, walk in prepared and make sure everybody has the right brief. So I've seen the issue from both sides, but now that I'm on the independent side, I feel like I have less control over it than I would have had in executive capacity.
For independent directors, there is a very good mechanism, which is that before every board meeting, you have a meeting of the independent directors, informal, unstructured, no agenda meeting, where it becomes a clearinghouse of ideas, doubts, concerns, etc., before you go into the boardroom. And it works very well. Because I might not know something, you and I are directors on the board, you know more about that. Here, outside of the boardroom, in an informal meeting of independent directors, I get a better insight into what is coming up for discussion, or what has been bothering me, without basis maybe, and the rest of the directors might put me wise. So it's useful to have a meeting of independent directors before every board meeting. You don't budget too much time, half an hour is good enough.
You should learn as chairman how to manage the boards. First is, you must allow everybody to speak.
Yes.
Never put anybody down. Ask everyone what's your opinion. So they'll all give the opinion. Second, allow the debate. So everybody will discuss. Then try to come to a consensus and persuade people. Everybody can be persuaded most time. Second thing, if the deeply contentious issue, talk to individual directors before the meeting to give them the background and everything. Because in a meeting, everybody has an opinion. It goes off on a tangent. Yes. Then you'll never get an answer. It's important to get a decision and an answer. Because managing board and disparate people is an art. You must have the skill. And the next thing is, you must make sure that the management is always there to give information, to answer queries, etc., not to force their will. Sometimes managers are very strong, the CEO is a superstar, he comes and imposes his will. People keep quiet, they get intimidated. It's the role of the chairman to make sure that people talk and they give presentation and there's a whole debate. And then it's also important to ask independent directors to come in a board meeting and talk on a 5-10 minutes on an item of their choice where they can explain their viewpoints and others. Because this is to create a culture where open debate can happen and where you can face let's say unpalatable choices. And then whenever there are conflicts, you openly discuss them and without making the issue the center rather than the person. You make the issue the center, remove the person from the issue, even the person is involved, then you can get a better answer because emotion will come into play when people feel their target and other things. Please remember, everybody in the board is an emotional creature. All of us are emotional creatures. We respond to emotion, not logic. Correct?
Yeah,
and
that's
that is
very
what
fair.
It's an interplay of people and emotions in a board which there needs to be a chairman or somebody who learns to manage. And you as an individual should also know your limitation, should also know where to fight, what not to fight, should also know you must give in on small matters and not make it a big issue, because it's not important in the larger context. What is important is value system transgression. What is important is fraudulent behavior. What is important is conflict of interest. Rest of it, there could be a difference of opinion, let management do it.
Yeah, I think for a lot of regulated entities, it becomes a matter of saying, if we put this debate on record, what does it lead to? So for me, I think this problem comes because, as an executive, you at least know what the issue is, how much is the risk. But as a non-executive, and I think your suggestion is very, it's very practical if it works every time, because you sometimes get this feeling, if there is not enough, if somebody has called you individually and said, we are planning to have this person or remove this person or whatever, and then that issue just gets taken for granted and recorded as such, and then you think there is a mild sense of discomfort. So, thank you for that suggestion, and I think that should work.
Perfect. So with this, I think we can draw this to a close. So we'd like to thank Mr. Damodaran and Mr. Mohandas Pai for sharing their insights and their thoughts with us.